Whoa. Getting ahead of myself here. Now, where to begin? A long time ago... No, that doesn't really work. Okay, yeah. The best parts of our world are built on great ideas. Then there's also good ideas, not groundbreaking, but still important in their own right. And then there are the rest of them, thought up by the lesser minds. Think of like, get-rich-quick schemes, or inventions that have already been invented. Basically stuff like that person you knew in high school is now raving about. Things like that. Most of us, though, we wind up in that third tier, because that one great idea that we think is totally original has already been thought of by somebody else. Or maybe many others. For me, it was about the iconic cultural phenomenon, James Bond. But what specifically about Bond and his many films is so interesting to me? Simple, really. It has to do with history.
Are you being intentionally dense?
Huh?
I know what you're gonna say, but hear me out. I love history. I have a degree in it, for all the good it did, and I love talking about it. So for me, the best kind of history isn't about memorizing dates and names, but the moments and stories that make us think about how everything connects, and about how we got to where we are now. Can history and James Bond really help with that?
The thought had occurred to me.
I think so. And I guess I better if I'm making an entire video about it. So despite being a fictional character, the larger issues surrounding his life and times reflected what was taking place in the real world. While Bond was saving the planet and getting the girl, these movies brought to light responses to real-world moments and trends. Looking back, these moments may not have seemed like anything but the backdrop for Bond to chase women and punch foreigners. But if we dig a little deeper, there might be something there. Believe me, when I thought of this, I thought I was a genius. But if my upbeat intro was any indication,
your instincts are dead wrong.
There's a lot of thinkers, historians, pop culture aficionados, and more who thought of this long before me. In particular, a British historian named Jeremy Black has done a lot of work on the subject, making me look like a fool. After even the tiniest bit of research, I really feel like an idiot for thinking I was so smart.
Unfortunately, I misjudged you. You are just a stupid
historian.
Still though, I can use this. I can make connections to history and consider them all with the depth and wisdom that I earned by slacking off for all those years in university. History over the past 100 years, what we could call recent history, has been a bit of an issue. It's like everyone got together collectively and decided to really ramp it up. So much changed so fast it was hard to keep track of it all. I mean, it's still changing. For Bond to respond to so many different historical moments is impressive, but also necessary if we as an audience are going to keep caring about some British guy and his wacky adventures. To stay relevant, James Bond needed to evolve. And by that I mean that the narratives and plots needed to relate to world changes and events, at least in some way. It needed to be real enough and relevant enough to keep our attention. At the same time, the base character, whose personality and actions people seem to find, if not endearing, maybe intoxicating or charismatic, oftentimes didn't change at all. The actors might have, the mannerisms, the gadgets, the goofiness, but the idea of James Bond didn't really change. See, Bond isn't a good guy. He's definitely a good guy, but the things we watch him do and cheer him on for doing can be pretty exploitive or downright cruel, however necessary we think they are at the time. And don't get me wrong, I cheer right along with you. So when Bond...
For England, James? No. For me.
Or... Or... Or...
I may have some breaking news for you, Elliot. You forgot the first rule of mass media, Elliot. Give the people what they want.
Or...
I'll buy you a delicatessen in stainless steel.
All right, keep your hair on.
Put me down! Put me down!
Oh, you want to get off?
Mr. Bond!
Or even... When he does all that, I get that warm, justice-y feeling coursing through me like everyone else. But if the character is relatively the same throughout the series, the situations and the overall context are not. So what I want to do is look at these moments, some that the Bond movies bring to light, in my eyes anyway, in greater detail. A mix of history and film, with an effort to be entertaining and maybe even informative. This series can look into the past, far enough back to be like history, but still close enough to not seem too much like history. I thought I could use the Bond films as a gateway to look at moments in time that were worth looking into, or at least mildly interesting. So this is Bonding with History, Episode 1, Dr. No and Ian Fleming. Now we can get to the... Based on all that, this might look like a biography. But it's not. Well, it's not entirely true.
I want the truth.
No, what I meant was...
Liar.
Okay, seems like a fair reaction. Anyway, I'm just not a fan of biographies.
Which begs the obvious question, who cares?
It's just... what's the overall argument? This person was important and affected many lives, maybe even changed the world. Great. Probably true. I'm not saying biographies aren't real history. I'm not trying to gatekeep or anything. But my big thing with biographies is that they tend to push the idea that individuals in history do things by themselves. It's tough to do things by yourself, on a grand scale. Of course, people on an individual level can set things in motion, bring about ideas, act as an inspiration, etc., etc. But movements need broad support to take flight. Caesar didn't cross the Rubicon by himself, Napoleon didn't conquer most of Europe alone, and some of the 20th century's greatest monsters, Hitler and Stalin, didn't rise to power on their own. They had armies, and they had the popular support that allowed them to act, for better, or more oftentimes, for worse. Again, people on their own can be the catalyst, but they don't receive the backing to make their movements more widespread, and they can be left as nothing more than an interesting footnote. History is full of interesting footnotes, but there's a reason that they aren't in the main body of work. I feel like we usually give individuals a lot more credit as time passes too, creating a myth around them, to reinforce the idea that one person can do it all themselves. In turn, that makes us feel better, because we want it to be true. We want to be the exceptional one, the savior, the hero, even though it rarely happens. It brings about the idea that if it's true for them, then it can be true for us. I don't feel that I should have to point this out. I don't want to say that you're not a special little snowflake deserving of love and attention, but it's the avalanche that changes history. So, if that wasn't an obvious enough comedy setup, I wanted to use Dr. No, the first James Bond film, to look at the history of Ian Fleming, but also his most famous character. A lot of people, cryptic and unspecific I know, think that he modeled the character after himself, and while that's kind of true, there's more to the story. There's pretty much always more to the story. Those are the kind of biographies I can really get behind, the ones that try to contextualize their figure and flesh them out beyond the simple one hero saves the day or one villain ruins the world. To soothe my fragile ego, I can say that this isn't a biography at all, but an in-depth story of a person's life written by someone else. Oh God. I'm conflicted, as I often am, by how to approach these movies. I'm not an expert on film or film history. I'm not a filmmaker in any capacity. Really, I'm barely competent enough to talk about them at all. What do good reviewers talk about, so I can steal their ideas? Characters? Characters, probably. Heroes and villains. But in a Bond movie, we already know who the hero is, and we know what he stands for. The villains are a motley crew, usually consisting of old, rich white men, with some exceptions. Tone? The stakes are very high, end of the world high, giving them a certain weight, even when they are goofy as hell.
I have no problem with female authority.
James, you're incorrigible.
The plot is another easy topic, but I don't want to sit here and list off plot elements to you. Plus, it's a Bond movie. They follow a certain format. Rooty, tooty, sexton, shooty.
Point taken.
You've only got 4 days, 007. Don't spend your time sitting on
His legs. Werewolves.
Oh, James.
Keep your hands up, Mr. Bond. We're sending a boat along to take you off.
Yes. You've had your second.
Die!
This isn't the intricate and scientific primer,
And I can imagine no way in which this thing would be considered anywhere remotely close to safe.
or the wacky insanity of the Grand Budapest Hotel.
The police are here.
Tell them I'll be right down. She's been murdered, and you think I did it.
This is British spy man solving.
Insert issue here.
If you want to see how a movie plays out, watch it. In this way, I guess movies are kind of like history, at least how I like to think about it. You expand upon the moments that interest you, and then read about stuff that you want to read about. So what I do want to point out are things that I found interesting, or funny, or odd, or even terrible at times, at least from my perspective. If you want the major plot points, watch the movie, or read about it on Wikipedia. This site is a goldmine for learning. It has articles on pretty much everything. It's an invaluable tool. Invaluable in the sense that I will not spring to help support it. Without it, we'd be looking through books for basic information, an ancient text called a Wikipedia. But, if it's so good, why can't we cite it? Teachers will always tell you to never cite Wikipedia, which of course is the right move. Never challenge authority, especially when it's your history teacher. And even more especially when your history teacher is just the gym teacher who has a free period since they already inflated all the dodgeballs. But the real reason is that almost anyone can change Wikipedia whenever they want. It usually gets changed back right away, but that's something you can't do with a book or a newspaper article or a movie. Those things are pretty set. But what Wikipedia is, and where its usefulness lies, is in being a starting point. It can give you a base amount of info for a topic before you go into the details with other sources. I read the wiki for a lot of stuff before starting this. Afterwards, I still managed to read through a book or two. Options, which Wikipedia also provides at the bottom of the article. Now back to the show. Dr. No starts with a Bond staple, the gun barrel sequence. The first one, the one that started it all. It just screams Bond, and no matter who uses it, we know what it's referencing. That's why I made it into my intro, along with the iconic score. But we see some differences. The main ones, from the ones that would follow later on, are the awkward hop, skip, and jump. And the weird blood effects. There's also the fact that that's not Sean Connery showing off his twinkle toes around there, but his stuntman. This is one of the moments where the work of the little people shines through, and it was the ingenuity of Maurice Binder that influenced how Bond movies would start from then on. Like we're going to see as a common factor in the making of this film, Ian Fleming had no part in it. They actually put a little camera into a gun barrel to make the shot work, with the idea coming from a much earlier film, The Great Train Robbery. I wonder if they put this same energy and dedication into Die Another Day's awful fake bullet thing.
Obviously, you're not a fan of awful CGI.
But if you're like me, maybe you forgot all about that. Like I tried to forget about this. But I digress. The start of this movie is marked by the contrasts from later films. There's no original song connected to the title. The song that they do use is not what most people would expect. And then there's the awkwardness of the dancing silhouettes. It feels like a first draft, so it just shows how the first movie was a work in progress. There was no formula as to what made a Bond film or title sequence work yet. But after it's all over, all this title sequence stuff, the show needs to start. We want the big man, the fantasy for every man-child all over the world. Bond. There has to be Bond. And there he is, in all his glory. At about the 8-minute mark. And Sean Connery is Bond to a lot of people. Who thought that this blue-collar guy could become the dapper spy? Of course, he was coached into the role by the director Terrence Young, and the two improvised lines and built the character as they filmed.
Sergeant, make sure he doesn't get away.
Well, they can't all be winners, can they?
While he wasn't Fleming's first choice, or even the producers, there can be no doubt that they chose the right man for the job. Iconic Bond. But before we get to Bond, we get to watch what is one of the whitest things I've ever seen.
Right. Damn it all, must you break off at this time every evening?
Sorry, General. My managing director is a creature of habit. He has a call put through to me every day about this time.
Anyway, hurry back before the cards get cold.
20 minutes. And don't try doctoring any hands for me while I'm away.
And then one of the most awkwardly planned and executed murders I've ever seen. Then another mainstay of early Bond. People talking.
W6N, W6N, W6N. Calling G7W. How do you hear me? Over.
G7W, London. G7W, London, receiving you. Over.
Talking about what's happening.
What is it? W6N, Kingston, Jamaica, broken contact, sir, just after they came up on routine transmission.
Broken or faded?
Broken, sir, just voice. The carrier wave still established.
Then some walking.
W6N, W6N, report my signal.
And more talking.
Form the signal, sir. Oh, Jamaica's broken off mid-transmission. No, sir, it's not a technical fault. Yes, sir. Will you tell him, sir?
And more. Oh my god. Oh god. Well, about time. But eventually the movie stops edging and goes all in.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
As far as character intros go, that's gotta be up there. Even after all these years, this Sean Connery version is probably the most memorable utterance of one of the most famous phrases in movie history. Up there with,
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
And
May the force be with you.
Except this one is repeated at least once per film. Every film. Just to make sure the audience remembers who he is.
Bond, James Bond.
To remember who I am, I sew my name into my underwear.
No. No more foreplay.
Bond is as cool a customer as ever, taking money from a woman because he's a feminist who believes in equality. But then the real work begins, and Bond heads off to MI6 to exchange banter with Miss Moneypenny. Banter that would make any modern HR rep squirm.
Well, see if he's there, will you? James, where on earth have you been? I've been for you. You never take me to looking like this, James. You never take me to period.
I would, you know. Only Anne would have me court-martialed for,
Flattery'll get you nowhere, but don't stop trying.
But it was the 60s, so it was a different time.
It's fun exploring new places, doing the things that add so much to the pleasure of living. And at times like these, it's so natural to light up a Kent.
You feel better about smoking with the taste of Kent, Kent with the micronite filter.
Does that mean it's okay? Do we pass judgment on the past? Yeah, all the time. This is a common issue. But based on an extremely limited sample size, I've seen and read a lot of judgment about what happened in the past. And I think this is a mistake. Not because I condone what happened, but because judging people in the past based on modern values does no good. It just overshadows attempts at understanding the era. Now, I'm not saying that this excuses what took place, but it definitely goes a ways to explaining it. They may have been wrong, and oftentimes were, but people often act based on the perceptions and values of their time. This is not a defense of how unfair or awful it was, far from it. But if you can't get past the injustice of it all, you'll be stuck being depressed about how terrible everything was, and always has been. Instead, we should be thinking about the specific causes and effects, and more importantly, making sure that those injustices don't repeat themselves now. Perspectives change, as they should, but just because those perspectives don't match ours now doesn't discount them as historically relevant. Of course it was unfair, and for a lot of people now it still is. But modern outrage can't fix what happened then. I won't pretend these things didn't happen. Most of all, I won't limit my view of the past to moralizing it by contemporary standards. All you can hope for is that the knowledge of what happened can stop it from happening again, even if we seem to fail on that last part a lot. Okay, I promise to try and limit these interludes from now on. Maybe. So if you thought of Bond as a rebel, strap in. He proceeds to get chewed out by his boss, the letter M, first for having fun on his time off,
Happens to be 3 a.m. When do you sleep, 007?
then for carrying a lady's gun.
You tell him. For the last time.
It's nice and light. In a lady's handbag.
But, just like the stone-cold killer that he is, Bond immediately accepts and falls into line. Huh. Okay. Bond's submission to authority is one of the more jarring elements in these early films.
Take off your jacket. Give me your gun.
Sure, he fought on the side of the Angels, but I like to think of him as having a bit more of an attitude about it. Action heroes aren't meek, right? After more exposition, Bond shows off his technical knowledge.
Throwing the gyroscopic controls of a guided missile off balance with a radial beam or something.
We have to be standing in exactly the right spot at exactly the right time.
Or something.
What does he want?
What do all men with power want? More power. Be there at that exact time.
Or something.
Countdown.
We're gonna count down to what, David?
It's like in chess. First you strategically position your pieces, then when the timing's right, you strike.
Or something.
And because Bond is known for jetting away from dreary old London to a whole lot of exotic locales, he heads off to the only other location of the film. After some necessary sex first, of course. If he didn't postpone work for sex, he wouldn't be our hero. Our timid, ladies' gun-toting hero. So the plot is set, and Bond is on a collision course with destiny. But to look at this in a different light, we can use this first film to delve into the history of Bond, which also means looking at the writer who started it all. But Dr. No wasn't the first Bond book that Ian Fleming wrote, and it definitely wasn't the first film that they planned to make.
All right, boys and girls, here we go. Everybody, come on now.
See, Casino Royale was the first book that Fleming wrote, but the producers wanted to showcase more action, and they decided that the first film was to be Thunderball, the 9th book and eventually the 4th film, but due to legal issues out of the control, they had to settle for Dr. No, the 6th book. Casino Royale would show up in 1967 as the 5th film, but not from the production companies from the regular Bond films, so not the 5th film in terms of the franchise we all know. The 5th film for that franchise was You Only Live Twice, which is actually the 12th book. Casino Royale would later be rebooted in 2006 as the 21st film in the franchise, and technically the 23rd overall Bond film, due to the original Casino Royale and Never Say Never Again, which was actually a remake of Thunderball, also starring Sean Connery, but premiering in 1983 as the 17th Bond film.
Anyone else care to have some sort of mental breakdown?
I get that they were using the books as set pieces to sell the character, but did it have to be so confusing? But really, after the first film, the source material for the movies became less and less important. Even in this first instance, they make the enemy organization the International Cabal of Villainy, Spectre, instead of the Russian-led Smersh like it was in the books. I guess I didn't want to rule out all the potential rubles a movie about a British spy could bring in. The story of Bond starts with the story of Ian Fleming, and the story of Ian Fleming starts the way that all the best, relatable stories do. High-class British society.
I went dancing at the Café de Paris, which felt very young and gay.
And we saw Henry Talbot try out a racing car. So now we're all members of the Bright Young Things.
I don't know about bright.
The Right Honourable Neville Chamberlain, Minister for Health.
Lord Grantham. Lady Grantham.
I'm so sorry.
Thomas, on his left side.
Give me the napkins.
I'll call the ambulance.
Keep him warm. Take my coat.
What is it?
All right.
This took a turn.
Fleming, the second son of a new money family, was born in 1908. People may correct me, but I think this is the only year in recorded history where nothing happened. Oh, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were reportedly killed in Bolivia. Mother's Day is celebrated for the first time. That's nice. Oh, and construction of the Titanic begins in Belfast, Ireland. Oh, God. Life for the rich is pretty much how you imagined it, but Fleming quickly showed himself as a bit of a black sheep, which is an excuse everyone uses when you don't join the House of Lords by your 16th birthday. Actually, it was really due to his brother outshining him, which would persist throughout his life, and a dominating mother that dogged his youth and beyond. He was never too scholarly, pretty good at sports, but would never be the best. He was part of that group that was okay at a bunch of stuff, but never seemed to excel anywhere. It also seemed like young Ian Fleming was just bored. Fighting boredom was a constant in Fleming's life, and would be one of the traits he would eventually pass on to his most famous character. But this wasn't just any boredom. It was the type of boredom that disproportionately affects the rich who never had to work particularly hard throughout their lives. Having multiple vacation homes lets you worry more about boredom than your next meal.
I'm so bored.
Literal first world problems and all that. Fleming has a few biographies, but the main ones are by John Pearson in 1966, Andrew Lysette in 1995, and to a lesser extent, Ben McIntyre in 2008, although the last one was kind of a dual author-character thing. Believe me, they go into excruciating detail on his early life, more than I ever want to focus on.
Oh no. Come on, we're here. Just give me the Cliff Notes version. Like who's the guy with
stupid books?
It's just called
Ian.
Okay, shorthand lingo. I like it.
The Cliff Notes are: early childhood tragedy? Check. His father Valentine was a member of Parliament and contemporary of Winston Churchill. Val died in World War I and was eulogized in the newspaper by Churchill himself, with Ian keeping a signed copy on his desk in his later years. School? You're goddamn right. He went to several schools throughout his early years, including Dunford, hated it, Eton, left early due to a bad attitude, Royal Military College.
So keep your sense of humor, please.
Hey, come on now.
The first month at Sandhurst is designed to be the worst.
Left citing medical issues, which turned out to be a case of gonorrhea. He lied about that one until he died. And then private schooling in Austria, headed by an ex-MI6 agent. That last one might sound promising, but I promise you, it's going to be a lot more boring than you think. All work and no play make Ian a dull boy? Not likely. Gained a love of cars and fast driving in his early years. Had a major accident when his car was hit and dragged by a train. He survived. Low point? Only one? Here we go. Failed career attempts in the Foreign Office, he lied about that later on too. Journalism, technically he was pretty good. Banking and stockbroking. Stockbrokering? Being a stockbroker. Basically, it seemed Fleming could do no right. And I know this is brief, and that a child's formative years can dictate their path in life, but it's just so blah. It's filler to get us to the big show, how the Second World War let Fleming really come into his own. War isn't good, this we know, but it doesn't mean that people can't find their purpose during them. And World War II is probably the most studied historical subject, so why not talk about it? Sure, he may have gained his position as lieutenant, later earning a promotion to lieutenant commander, in the Naval Intelligence Division of the Royal Navy, the way that any of us would have, through nepotism and generally being part of a richer class of people. But he did show his merit. His boss, Admiral John Godfrey, one of the more likely inspirations for the character M, was an abrasive person, and if I know anything about British society, and I certainly don't, they appreciate manners.
Take off your jacket. Give me your gun.
Small aside, based on how Bond in the novels and in the first film was so timid around M, some have hypothesized that the character was actually based on Fleming's mother Evelyn, whose matriarchal presence dominated much of their relationship. Hell, he even called his mom M when he was growing up. Weird, but another clue. But still definitely weird. Maybe this is more obvious thanks to Judi Dench's performance starting in the 90s, so it's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Speak for yourself.
So Fleming, with his easygoing nature and desire to please older men...
Well, first time for everything. Yes.
What makes you think this is my first time?
Oh, Mr.
Fleming.
Not like that, you rascals. Was used as a go-between for all the political leaders and intelligence divisions. That's all fine and good, but where Fleming really showed his flair was in the crazy planning that goes on in war. They really take the concept of no bad ideas seriously. Here's a list of some of his zanier plots. Sinking boats into the Danube River to stop German shipping, like some sort of hybrid dam. Forging German currency to ruin their economy. probably stealing the idea from the Germans themselves. Sealing people inside of a big cement block and dropping it off the coast of France so the guys inside could keep an eye on the Nazi defenses. Annoying the Germans with a radio ship that would broadcast propaganda. Getting captured enemy officers drunk so that they would reveal military secrets. Enlisting the help of an occultist to give fake horoscopes to a top-level Nazi who was interested in the dark arts. And a named one here, Operation Ruthless, downing a captured German plane with disguised British soldiers, so that when they were rescued by other Germans, the Brits could kill them to steal their codebook. Codes and breaking codes were the name of the game at that time. None of those ever really came to light, but they let him plot away, and if that isn't foreshadowing, I don't know what is. His most notable success was the 1942 creation of a team of specialists and commandos that would infiltrate enemy lines and steal intel, but they were really more like safe blowers instead of safe crackers. Later called 30AU, Assault Unit, they would be very successful, targeting documents, weapon designs, and even people that would benefit the war effort. It was a pretty good idea, one that he lifted from an already created German commando group. This kind of blatant plagiarism is often looked down upon, but it was the wartime, so provisions had to be made. Fleming took a lot of pride in the work they did, calling them his... Red Indians. Ooh, that didn't age well. Ultimately, Fleming never saw much action himself. He spent the war plotting from relative safety, as well as drinking and smoking. Constantly. And there's still uncertainty on whether he was a fighter stuck behind a desk, or a desk jockey who liked to think of himself as a fighter. Personally, I think it was the latter. For all his grand plots, it never seemed like Fleming was a killer, and he's certainly never one who could condone killing in cold blood. Something that novel Bond does even less than his film counterpart. In the end, those years showed him he could become something, despite all the years before indicating otherwise. All the people he met, plots he devised, and experiences he undertook were all stored in his mind, to be used later when a certain British secret agent, himself a veteran of the Second World War, was first put to page. And now, a word from our sponsor.
You feel better about smoking with the taste of Kent with the micronite filter. Refines away a harsh flavor, refines away a hot taste. It makes the taste of a cigarette mild.
Oh God, shut it off! Shut it off! Hey, shut it off! I've been saying that this is the first Bond movie, and while that's true in a certain sense, it's not the first time the character's been on screen. Because who can forget the charming, suave, and oh so cool American James...
Cod sense Jimmy Bond, they call you.
Jimmy.
Hello? It's Jimmy? It's Leiter again.
Okay, Jimmy Bond. Originally shown on CBS's Climax anthology in 1954. In an hour-long episode, they decided to use the premise from Casino Royale after buying the rights from Fleming for a cool grand. The entire episode is awkward, to say the least.
May I say you're a very important cipher?
You flatter me, sir. You flatter me, sir. You flatter me, sir.
Jimmy, working as a combined intelligence agent, has nothing on his British counterpart. If you aren't familiar with the book, the plot points are similar to the 2006 movie. Bond gambles in a casino to make sure the bad guy loses. But in this version, just like in Dr. No, Bond is shown as a skilled baccarat player. And I say skilled, but it's completely about luck.
Mostly luck, anyway.
Like completely based on luck. It's a luck-based game. The characters actually go through the rules of baccarat in the show, since it seems like this pastime for the French nobility might not be well known to an American audience. They also made Leiter into a Brit, so the Anglo-American role reversal is complete.
Le Chiffre is the toad-like creature, playing at the table in there. He's the chief Soviet agent for this area, controlled through Leningrad, Section 3 through Paris.
The whole thing is just so odd. It seems like a parody at this point. The villain Le Chiffre is the only bright spot. I mean, if you're into that Weasley little man who chews the scenery type thing.
Although I always thought that mutual love means mutual trust.
Do you love me, Jimmy?
He's much too sensible to answer that.
Plus he works for those filthy communists, so he's definitely evil. The entire thing is available on YouTube, but I think there's a reason that it was lost for almost 30 years after it aired. But back to James.
No, Jimbo!
James Bond. In many ways, Dr. No is the one that started it all. In many other ways, it's one of the slower paced Bond movies. We're about 20 minutes into the movie at this point, and Bond hasn't killed anyone yet. If you enjoyed scenes like this, or this, or even this, then Dr. No promises the exact opposite. The first action we see is him awkwardly tossing around a chauffeur. Then he moves on to ordering guys to grab women for him.
Get her, Quarrel. And the camera.
Or laughing at the beliefs of others.
You see, there's a dragon. What?
But eventually we get to one of the most important moments of the movie. Drawn out walking sequences. God, they're beautiful. But this is a Bond movie, so there have to be some essentials, like gadgets. Gadgets, yes. Sure, he can wield his manly Walter PPK, but Bond needs his gadgets, or how do we know he's a spy?
Latest thing from Q-Branch. Called a radio.
Suspecting trouble in his hotel room, beyond the more pleasurable variety, Bond shows us the absolute peak of the spy world, with dust on a briefcase and hair on a door.
That's got to be the best
spy
I've ever seen.
Boy, if you don't shut the F up.
Honestly, as the story goes on, Bond is a lot more like a detective than a secret agent, as he tries to figure out what happened to Strangways.
Sit down, the Strangways.
Strangways has disappeared.
Strangways.
Oh, Strangways.
Commander Strangways.
Strangways.
Commander Strangways.
Strangways. Oh, Strangways on something special.
Seriously, the plot is nearly inconsequential in this one, with us following Bond around as he bumbles from one situation to the next. It's really just moments that let Bond go from one location to the next location. I mean, I guess that's all plot points really are in most movies, but in this case they're less than memorable. He hooks up with some allies, Felix Leiter and Quarrel, figures out something about missiles.
Does toppling mean anything to you?
A little.
And then there's something about radiation, I think?
Hi. Lose something? Take a look at this Geiger reading. Those samples Strangways brought back from Crab Key were radioactive.
But there's not too much to talk about in the overall plot beyond X happens, so Bond can go to Y, then Z happens, and so on. Instead of focusing on that, I want to talk about some Bond mainstays. One-liners. James Bond is known for his quick wit.
I'm Mr. Kill.
Well, there's a name to die for.
Basically, the man is never lost for words. Have you ever had an argument and then thought of a comeback hours or days later? Bond has never experienced that.
I trust you can handle this contraption, Q.
It goes by hot air.
Oh, then you can.
He's always ready with a quip, and it feels especially deserved when a villain is being particularly smug.
I'm sorry. That last hand nearly killed me.
But his one-liners can also come across as forced, since they don't make any sense in any context other than delivery to an audience. Look at this example.
You needn't worry. The second is...
Yes. Considerably.
Tell me, who was he talking to? Himself? Was it like a pat on the back moment? Did he brag to M about it later because he has no other friends? Regardless, it's a Bond constant, and it started here. The director, Terrence Young, thought it would be an interesting idea to include some dark humor. Maybe to take some of the sting out of Bond constantly murdering people. Some aren't terrible, but they make very little sense. Like...
Sergeant, make sure he doesn't get away.
Was he trying to screw up that guy's mental health? Or what he's saying to this random construction worker would freak out anyone?
How did it happen? I think they were on their way to a funeral.
But they probably tested well, making Bond seem like less of a machine to the audience, and at the same time trivializing the violence we see on the screen and somehow making it seem less so. Whatever the case, the one-liners definitely continue over the years, to varying degrees of success.
Hi, I'm Plenty.
But of course you are.
Plenty O'Toole.
Named after your father, perhaps?
Henchmen. While the villains are at the forefront of the plots, it's still the henchmen who steal our hearts. Oddjob, Jaws, Xena Onatop, Drax the Destroyer with no lines. They really make an impact as memorable parts of what makes a Bond movie. In this film, you might be thinking that Professor Dent, who's tattling to Dr. No had Strangways and his secretary killed, would be the henchman. But you're wrong. No. In this movie, that guy is boring. He's just a professor of geology. He looks at rocks for a living. And they barely fight. Bond just shoots him repeatedly, making him look like an idiot.
Mr. Smith & Wesson. And you've had your 6.
The first Bond movie needs a better henchman, and they're damn lucky they included this one. A tarantula. You know, the one they try to get to kill Bond after their first attempt was undercut by passing traffic?
Oh, better not try again. Let's go home.
Instead of just shooting at him again, they release a spider in his room in the vague hope that it would crawl on him and bite him, instead of just scuttling off and hiding, as a spider is much more likely to do. They just assumed the malcontent of the spider towards Bond, or that it would follow orders like a good soldier. I mean, they ended up being right anyway. However, in his toughest fight yet, Bond manages to throw it off and defeat it in the proper way an English gentleman should, with his trusty loafer. In time to the beat, no less.
Almost lost my cool there.
Bond girls. Bond and his women. Women and their Bond. The idea of a Bond girl is so apparent in pop culture now that I shouldn't even need to explain what it means. But it does mean that you're there to be saved by Bond and then sleep with Bond. It's not a difficult concept. At one point it was a definite compliment, and some people still probably feel that it is. However, the context of this title has changed. The feeling I get is that being called a Bond girl is much more of a negative to a lot of people now. Listen, don't accuse me of mansplaining or any of that. People are allowed to feel however they want about the title given to a character in a movie. I'm not saying there's one way to feel, but I am saying that in the 21st century, it's more likely to be seen as a negative.
Man talk.
Here's why. Bond girls are only there to be used by the main character, and are basically eye candy more than anything else. They're there to be seen or ogled. They are reactive to whatever Bond's actions are, rarely getting much agency of their own. They come and they go, no pun intended, and there's a revolving door of them in every film. When they die, as many often do, you feel bad, but, the plot moves on and you can forget about them. They are written as disposable from the start. In all of the films, there are only a handful that appear more than once. Sylvia Trench, Teresa Bond, Vesper Lynd, Madeline Swan. And even then, it might be as a memory. It's not usually in character. They're pretty, but they're not meant to stimulate conversation. Just other stuff. Not really someone that you want to emulate. There are exceptions to this disposable and reactionary idea, mainly in later films. But for the most part, this idea stands firm, just like our hero. Even when the Bond girls are smart, or strong, or seemingly immune to Bond's charms for the moment, they exist as an item of conquest. Bond knows it, and we as an audience definitely know it. There might be more complexity or nuance in their characterizations, but I don't think that the basic role has changed much. Changing their name to Bond women is all fine and good, but it depends on how their characters are portrayed more than what their title is. And, like clockwork, they pretty much always swoon in the end. So I can see why being a Bond girl can be seen as a negative, especially with names like
Holly Goodhead,
Plenty O'Toole,
Christmas Jones,
Dr. Pussy.
I'm Peaceful Fountains of Desire.
Pussy Galore.
I must be dreaming.
And who could forget
Felix, say hello to Dink.
Hi, Dink.
Dink, say goodbye to Felix.
Believe me, I don't think this is an original idea, but it merits some discussion considering how much time has passed since Dr. No premiered. And this brings us to the next big moment in the film, the introduction of Honey Rider, played by Swiss-German supermodel Ursula Andress. Even though she technically wasn't the first Bond girl, if we remember an earlier scene, she's still probably one of the most memorable. And talk about entrances, often compared to Botticelli's Birth of Venus, but way better.
I was captivated, entranced. It hit me like a thunderbolt. I had to ask the guy next to me to pinch me to make sure I wasn't dreaming.
For a lot of teenagers, it was probably the birth of manhood. And it was homaged years later. It definitely created a mythos surrounding the Bond girl.
A woman?
Your powers of observation do you credit, Mr. Bond.
Continued in part 2.
Or something.